Well, hi. Fancy seeing you there. It's been a while. Let me tell you about an idiot who started a YouTube channel. He was reviewing one book a week, and everything was going pretty well. And then he decided that wasn't enough for him. He thought, why don't I pick on something really meaty and challenging that most people won't have read, that most people wouldn't even have time to read? Wouldn't that be an interesting idea? And so, here it is. The 900-page, 35-year-old novel that the internet has been clamoring for somebody to review. 5 weeks later, 4 videos behind, the entire YouTube strategy gone out the f***ing window. And here's the thing. I would do it again in a heartbeat. A Place of Greater Safety was Hilary Mantel's first great historical novel. It was published in 1992, and it elevated her status to that of the writer we think of today. The book is about 3 men whose personalities, whose achievements, whose vices, and whose prejudices not only kicked off the French Revolution, but transformed it into what it became, a thing of violence and terror. The narrative follows Camille Desmoulins, Georges Danton, and Maximilien Robespierre all the way from their births under the ancient regime, all the way to, things that happened during the Reign of Terror. And it takes you through almost every famous event in the French Revolution through those 3 pairs of eyes in a staggering work of imagination and historical research that spans almost 900 pages, 5 parts, each the length of its own book, 170 characters, and a narrative that stretches more than 3 decades. But what's it like? Well, I've taken my hat off, which should give you a clue. 1, from the very start of this book, you realize you're dealing with an extraordinary storyteller. It's that weird amalgam of somebody who's fantastically literary and descriptive, but who also spins an unbelievably good yarn. Danton's early life in particular, a kind of bruiser who nearly loses his life when he gets kicked in the head by a bull, is just impossible to put down. From the very start, you just never know what's going to happen next. You don't know whose perspective you'll follow or how closely. Will you be eavesdropping them from another room? Will you be over their shoulder? Will you be in their mind? You might jump from a conversation into a real quotation from a diary, from a pamphlet, from a speech, from one of these characters, which is indistinguishable from the way that she writes them and gives the book such a sense of veracity. Then you might get a single sentence or a paragraph that's just history in this really wry and clever way. Look at this. Just one sentence paragraph. Life expectancy in France has now increased to almost 29 years. And then you're back in the story again. Then suddenly you'll get a whole chapter which is stream of consciousness experience from a character whose viewpoint you've never entered before. And then beyond that, you'll get 3 or 4 pages of, like this, of dialogue in kind of play script or judicial transcript format. And the crazy thing is it always works. None of it ever feels labored or forced or cheap. It's brilliant and it all works perfectly. It's a kind of virtuosic fluidity. Having said that, and you can probably tell, this is a book that, while easy to read, requires your full attention. It requires a bit of time. And quite frequently when I was reading it, I came back to the same question, which is, how did she write this? I mean, to call A Place of Greater Safety an achievement is almost insultingly understated. It's vivid, it's dense, it's utterly transfixing. There is a deftness, a mastery, not only over language, but a kind of authority over truthfulness that means that almost every sentence you read, you think, I can't imagine another way of putting that would be better. Obviously, in 900 pages, not everything lands perfectly, but my God, so much of it does. And there is a sense of place in this novel, a snapshot into another time that is utterly captivating. But I think that what distinguishes this from so many books I've read recently is the level of psychological insight she applies to her characters. They have epiphanies that are genuinely moving. Come on. There we go. And now we have the co-host. When Danton becomes thoroughly sick of trying to change France through the legal processes, he's wandering off, cursing the system. The constant shuttling of opinions is tiring, and the shuffling of papers across desks, the chopping of logic and the trimming of attitudes. There must somewhere be a simpler, more violent world. That initial impulse of clever people to think that violence will be the solution feels very, very true to history in the last 150 years. Elsewhere, when Camille is about to get married, she describes him suddenly terrified by his own happiness, wondering whether happiness is a language that he didn't learn growing up, and he's worried he'll never be able to be fluent in it. There are so many places in this book where you have moments really genuinely very touching. And that's even more of an achievement because every single character in this book, all 170 of them, are either an asshole or gradually become an asshole. I mean, you see the cover and you see the red, white, and blue, and you think liberté, égalité, fraternité, and then you start reading and you realize every single person was in it for themselves. At least according to Mantel's version, I don't think there has ever been a time when people have transitioned from genuine idealism to self-interest to sickening levels of cynicism in such a rapid and complete way. And absolutely central to this is the character who changes the most and the least throughout the novel, Maximilien Robespierre, who begins the book as probably the most sympathetic character. And it's extraordinary to realize, if you didn't know, like I didn't, that Robespierre didn't start in the same sociopathic vein as many of the 20th century monsters who emulated parts of what he did. It's fascinating to realize, at least according to Mantel's version of events, that Robespierre could have been an exceptionally virtuous and even admirable person in different circumstances. And his transition from a man who does not believe in the death penalty and is physically sick in the street when he must condemn a man to death as a judge into somebody who can justify killing thousands for ideas is central to the book. But it really makes you think about evil in a different way. Danton is similarly kind of despicable in the way that he goes from a seemingly dedicated revolutionary to someone who kind of fancies himself a king. And in that way, Camille and his wife, Lucille, are exceptionally interesting characters. They are deeply unlikable and hypocritical from the start. But the thing is they're always honest about what bags they are. As a result, when Danton and Robespierre become less and less decent and more hypocritical, you really despise them in a way that you don't with Camille and Lucille, because they end up being much more honest about their own flaws. To paraphrase Coriolanus, they are not false to their natures, they play the people they are. One of the entertaining but a little bit exhausting things in this book is just how unpleasant everybody turns out to be. And talking about being exhausted, this book nearly broke me along with the YouTube channel. It's fucking enormous. I started it 5 weeks ago. By comparison, all of the books on this shelf I read in about 6 weeks, I think. I flew through the first 150 pages and then suddenly I got stuck. I genuinely don't know if I had some kind of mental block, if it was the stress of knowing I was falling so behind on the YouTube thing that made it more difficult to read. It's so strange because the book is so readable, and yet for a while I found it so difficult to get through. I can't explain exactly why. Despite the hundreds of characters, you always know where you are. You always know what's going on. Everyone is very, very distinct, and it feels concise even though it's long. In reading it everywhere I went, I noticed something very different about this book, which is it's one that's going to elicit quite a lot of comments. They nearly always came with an unimpressed look, like, what are you reading there? Oh, Hilary Mantel. Right. It made me realize that a lot of people look at somebody reading a book like this and they decide that it's the prop for a bit of a douchebag. And their response is kind of underlying, you think you're better than other people, don't you? I don't care. But, if you're reading in public, you might want to take a plastic bag to protect it from the rain. Stop yourself from getting RSI from carrying this around, and to stop everyone around you thinking you're a dickhead. But it didn't stop me reading in public because it required time. But then after all of this adulation, I would have to add that 5, it's not a perfect book. And this might be a weird thing to say, but after almost 900 pages, it left me wanting more. At a point, at about part 5, I would say, it stops feeling like this master narrative. And as the characters kind of lose control of the events, so does the book in a way. The threads start to drift apart. And I kind of resented it. I think central to my slight feeling of disappointment at the end of the book is that Robespierre always remains a cipher, someone unreadable, whose motivations and whose transformation is ultimately impossible to fully understand or explain. Maybe that's a problem with the man in the first place. Nobody can really explain how he changed so much, whether he was always this kind of vicious hypocrite or whether he went through some kind of derangement or mental breakdown that completely changed his mental landscape and his value system. So maybe that would have been an impossible feat. And another thing is that we don't see the very end of Robespierre's life. It stops at the height of the Reign of Terror. It ends at the point where the relationship between these three men is dissolved. But you really have a hunger to find out what happens to Robespierre, which is something that probably most people picking up this book will already know what happens at the end. How astonishingly different and dramatic his final day and his final moments were from anything that had come before it, that I felt really let down that we don't get to see Mantel's lens capture those moments. But having said that, obviously, because she is a magnificent writer, the book ends in a very, very strong way. It's just not the place that I wanted the book to end. So when all of that is said and done, where does this book end up on the rating system? Well, it almost defies attempts at rating it. And I wavered between the two kind of top tiers continuously through the 5 weeks that I've been reading this. On one side, it isn't a perfect book. It requires quite a lot of discipline to read. Not every moment works, and I did find it disappointing that despite its length and its psychological insight, we never get to see the end of Robespierre's life. Then, when I did a little research, I discovered a fact that completely transformed my opinion of the book again. Like I said at the start, this book was published in 1992. What I didn't know when I started it was that Hilary Mantel wrote this book between 1975 and 1979. This is her debut novel. She wrote it nearly 20 years before it got published. Nobody would publish it because she was an unknown, unpublished writer. That's when you realize how fucking good she was. Jesus Christ. This is her first book. That any first-time writer would have the ambition and the staying power and the skill to write this 900-page book about one of the most famous events in history with an ungodly amount of research and create a work of fiction 1/10 as good as this would be extraordinary. And so this book has to be bookshelf forever. It is a book that sat dormant for nearly 20 years, utterly timeless, completely modern, a work that redefined historical fiction, the greatest piece of fiction set in the French Revolution since Charles Dickens. Jesus Christ. And inspiration to anybody who's ever written a book and been rejected by a publisher. If this took 15 years from completion to make it to print, then do you know what? Maybe there's a chance for all of us. So I had to approach this book differently. I had to rediscover how I used to read longer books. I've had to make this review differently too. And so I don't have any alternatives for a place of greater safety. Plus, I'm just not that well read with historical fiction and books set during the French Revolution. I'd never recommend to you a book I haven't read myself. But instead, what I thought was, what if you've watched this review and you love the idea of reading A Place of Greater Safety or another really big book, but you're a little intimidated by a book that's so big and heavy that, you know, it might be confiscated by airport security as a potential weapon. Well, here's some strategies. Firstly, read the one book. I'm someone who generally has 3 or 4 books on the go. I know a lot of people like that. And in fact, I read the last 3 books that I've reviewed in this channel while reading the first third of this book. And that was dumb. I was completely stuck until I put everything else aside and I gave this the concentration and the attention that it deserved. Secondly, this is not a good bedtime read. If you're tired and sleepy, a large, dense book is not going to make a lot of sense. You're not going to get through very many pages. And if you're anything like me, you'll drop off and smack yourself in the head with it. And thirdly, related to the second point, dipping in for a page here and there doesn't work with this kind of book. Thrillers you can jump in and out of all day. In my video about replacing your phone with a novel, I talk about having something to hand every time you're going to look at your phone, just to look at for a minute or two. Don't try that with this. It won't work. You're just going to end up being frustrated. What I ended up doing was scheduling in time each day. That might sound a bit lame, but it's not. It just means saying, well, you know, from 9:30 till 10:30 instead of watching something on my phone or on the telly. I'll read this book. Commuting is also an excellent time for something like this. And if you give it the time that it deserves, you will really become invested. Yeah. And you'll even get impatient to spend another hour off your phone, off the telly, to read more, or you'll feel a bit disappointed when you can see your bus stop approaching and you have to put the book down. Fourthly, grab a bookmark or something bookmark adjacent. Big books are structurally a lot weaker and they suffer from like being plonked down, spine open. They will get ragged really quickly. And if you bought one second hand, the pages might start to fall out. And if you fold page corners, what you'll realize is you have too many places to be able to work out where you are. I didn't have a bookmark for a lot of this book, and look at this thing now. It looks like I've been using it to hammer in nails. It's shocking. Fifth and finally, read in public and what people think. Some of the best time to read is when you're out and about or waiting for someone. Some other people might judge you for enjoying a book like this in public. You're in much better company with the book than you would be with them. So those are my strategies for dealing with a long book, try them and see what happens. This has been a revelation for me, and although it was really tricky to get started, it taught me that you often have to relearn things that you were able to do previously, and to not be hubristic and dumb. I absolutely love this book, and I wouldn't change having read it. I think my other most memorable long books that I remember, occupying months of my time and just completely captivating me would probably be The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas and David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. But you let me know, what are your favorite long books? So that's it. Links to this book are in the description. Is it useful, me leaving links? Let me know. Clicking on those links helps me out, but if you want to help the world out, go to your local independent bookstore. Nosy on down and see if they have a copy of this. It is more than worth the trip. If you like this video, you know what to do. If you really liked it, consider signing up to the Substack. How can I move? You ready? Let's go. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Monday.